The long-awaited movie museum in the Dovzhenko Center, the exhibition VUFKU, Lost and Found, is a history of international success of the All-Ukrainian photo cinema administration in the 1920s. How did the legendary film community create a successful Ukrainian film industry and gain the fame of a Ukrainian Hollywood? The main task in this project was to find a starting point. This was done so that people who live in this country knew that we had such a significant past. And I think that the viewers will feel it in our exposition. This is an example of what an independent movie industry can achieve. We were simply destined to open this museum sooner or later. The movie museum opened with the exhibition project VUFKU, Lost and Found. This is a story about a revolutionary boom in the Ukrainian film industry. The legendary photo cinema administration worked for 8 years, but achieved stunning results. This is an absolute success in just several years. In 1922, they were just created, and in 1930, it all ended. In just 8 years, this was a colossal breakthrough. We have the film stock, we have the movies, and we can show them on a big screen. But we also want to present the context in which these movies were created. It was difficult to create this exhibition format and create some sort of new architecture in which viewer would find something more interesting than merely reading a text or watching a movie. So we tried our best to put ourselves in the shoes of viewers who are completely unfamiliar with the context. This was our main task, to reach mass audience and tell it this story, because this is an important part of history that very few people know about. But this is the kind of history that we could be proud of for more than one generation. Thanks to VUFKU, All-Ukrainian Photo Cinema Administration, Ukrainian filmmaking reached the international market. Its movies were screened in Germany, France, the Netherlands, Great Britain, the US and Canada. By signing agreements with key players in the industry, VUFKU became one of the European movie giants of the time, thus securing the fame of a Ukrainian Hollywood. If we look at the date, it all happened in the 1920s, and today we're approaching the year 2020. 100 years have passed since then. For Ukraine, the 1920s were incredibly successful, so we understand why they were followed by the lost Renaissance and why it was followed by the 1930s. The appearance of the VUFKU exhibition and the movie museum in the Dovzhenko Center are indeed the results of enthusiasm and great passion. The Dovzhenko Center possesses such a community of cinematologists and movie researchers. Cinema burns in the hearts of people who work in the film industry and are totally in love with it. This is that lively interest that allows a person to still remain critical. Materials of the multimedia exhibition dedicated to the Ukrainian film industry of the 1920s and VUFKU, in particular, are rich and varied, Olena Honcharuk emphasized. But they're scattered throughout different archives and museums. Even now, we still keep wondering if it was a good decision to present one exhibit instead of another. After all, each of them adds its own particular value to the narrative. But now the collection retains only the things that give the brightest impression about the VUFKU as a monumental phenomenon and a success story that involved a huge number of creators from the era of the 1920s. The main exposition area of the exhibition is the so-called backstage of the film factory, where movies are made, and there is a movie theater for viewing. In these two locations, the authors uniquely display their presentation of history and demonstrate the scale of development of the Ukrainian film industry in the early 20th century. We have our own dramatic composition, like a path of a Ukrainian villager who gets out from his village into the big city, that is, into a new urban surrounding. where there are many vehicles and many new stimuli. And generally, cinema appears in this same context as one more of those stimuli. Cinema developed in this period was not only in Ukraine, but in Europe and the US. After long years of war, revolutionary terror and the famine, people wanted to see something that would lighten their souls. Cinema is a cultural product that allowed for creativity. At the same time, it gave people a sense of joy and some useful knowledge. The All-Ukrainian Photo Cinema Administration still remains an example of the scale and success of cinema. Box office earnings of its films were incredible. The surviving creative works of VUFKU are a real treasure trove of management information and a source of professional pride for filmmakers. VUFKU is a product of its era. This was a state monopoly. VUFKU had such a serious ambition to create a brand like UFFA or Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Indeed, it had its own logo. They created a full-fledged system of product promotion and so on. And from such a viewpoint, nowadays this can be considered a very enviable ambition. As a method of cultural diplomacy at the time, VUFKU created an international brand of Ukraine, which became recognizable. Moreover, it was difficult from the corresponding brands in Russian cinema, like, for example, Sovkino. In this sense, their history is unique. Indeed, we can keep studying it for a long time, because the things presented at this exhibition are a huge mass of material. In the 1920s, this unique government structure created a successful Ukrainian film industry. VUFKU united the film studios of Odessa, Yalta and Kiev and developed production, distribution, advertising and education in the sphere of filmmaking. All of this caused a true movie mania in the country. Back then, what did VUFKU manage to do? First, let's say Dovzhenko or Kavaleridze, several film directors appeared over a few years. Dovzhenko started working in 1926, and by the start of 1930, he was already one of the princes of European cinema within a matter of 3 years. And at the same time, they created movies for the mass audience, which we're having problems with nowadays. Now we often talk about the level of scenarios in Ukrainian cinema, but VUFKU was trying to solve this issue in a very simple way. It engaged writers who could truly write a decent plot for a film. The administration also, for example, invited photographers to a school for cameramen. In this sense, their solution was simple as pie. I think that if now VUFKU in Ukraine hired a prominent writer to write screenplays, then the level of the film industry in the country would have been completely different and would have achieved greater success. Economic success, cultural autonomy and inclusive employment policies allowed VUFKU to attract the brightest creators from various spheres into its business. Dziga Vertov, Mikhail Kaufman, Alexander Dovzhenko, Ivan Kavaleridze, Les Kurbas, Danilo Demutsky, Mikhailo Semenko, Yuri Yanovsky, Pyotr Cherdinin. Every single name is a legend, and the list is basically never-ending. VUFKU was a very successful business project and a highly successful international organization. When I'm saying highly successful, I'm not exaggerating, as the films produced at VUFKU at the time were screened everywhere, from Prague to Paris to Tokyo. And this is the experience of this organization, the experience that cultural figures gained. This is true collective work, in which people that came from different industries with different ambitions and prospects still managed to create something for the sake of common good. Indeed, its financial and economic model was so efficient that it required no subsidies. Even nowadays, it's difficult to imagine cinema in Ukraine without state support. But building such a giant as the Kyiv Film Studio, with several pavilions in a matter of 2 years without any state support, is quite impressive. This is VUFKU's level of financial and economic success. One of our culture's most popular and successful projects was destroyed and forgotten for almost a century. In the following years, the 1930s, many figures from VUFKU faced brutal repressions, were killed, or were simply forced to emigrate. The age of VUFKU was like a start of the Ukrainian film industry, and VUFKU sort of became the start of the end of Ukrainian cinema. In this way, the exhibition will lead viewers through this euphoria. We wanted to give our visitors a chance to experience the 1920s in Ukraine in the flesh, so there will be a range between the lost and found. The history of Ukrainian avant-garde cinema still has a lot of gaps. Many works that were lost were only partially preserved. The exhibition came as a result of a large-scale study performed by the great team of the Dovzhenko Center. For example, Monkey Man was found in Japan, Taras Tresilo in France, and Pigs Will Be Pigs in Germany. Now we're working remotely with international film archives, and we started to screen them and add contemporary music to them. Thanks to our Kolo Dzigi screening cycle, many hundreds of people have already seen these movies. Adding sound to century-old silent films is a difficult and very responsible task. Musicians of the electroacoustic band Dziob from Dnipro told us. Thanks to their skills, the museum staff of the Dovzhenko Center managed to breathe a second life into the resurrected film artifact from 1929. They fully entrusted all the sounds in the movie to us, so we got this movie and were given an offer to create sound for it. Well, so we've got Oleksiy Badin and Maxim Andruch. They create everything, and we just perform it. This is a sort of genre synthesis. It includes classical, canonic techniques, as well as modern techno and lots of electronic music sounds. So this will be the final edition that will be released today. A movie that's almost a century old, but the hall is filled with young faces. One more film premiere from the Dovzhenko Center and musicians from the Dziob band received the earnest applause of the viewers. It's the magic of cinema and charm of time. Of course, this is always pleasant. Considering the years in which they were filmed, the camera work was fantastic. I think that such projects and such partnerships are extremely important for the Ukrainian Cultural Foundation. Therefore, it is very important for us to support this project and make sure it actually happens and that it will be followed by another, so that, as my colleagues said, this becomes a space for dialogue about the past, about the future. And this will be the place where one can find this dialogue, conversation, discussion. This exhibition was all the more difficult as we picked a period with the least amount of surviving materials. If we can present the 1920s, where so many things were not only lost in time, but deliberately destroyed, any material going forward will be within our grasp.